What if I were to tell you that I have a plan to benefit the Earth? The downside would be I'd have to starve hundreds of thousands, make that hundreds of millions of people, and it just so happens those people are the poorest of the poor. So the most poverty-ridden people end up starving to death, but it benefits the globe worldwide. Well, watch this video, and then we are going to discuss this topic.
And one of the things that's really terrified me about the environmentalist movement, which purports to be about the sanctity and security of the planet, is easily transformed into something that is clearly and demonstrably anti-human. Like, I've watched in absolute open-mouthed amazement over the last 10 years as the Greens and the radical leftists, when push comes to shove, immediately demonstrate their willingness to sacrifice the poor to their planetary salvation delusions. And it's so interesting, because in principle, the left has been the party that puts forward the demand for compassion towards the marginalized and the oppressed, economically and otherwise. But man, when you stack up the oppressed and marginalized against the hypothetical interests of the planet as such, the lefties will sacrifice the poor in a tenth of a second. And they do that not least with their insistence that energy costs have to skyrocket and consumption come down, which to me is tantamount to saying, when consumption comes down, the poor starve. That's a necessary consequence of decreased consumption. And anyone who thinks otherwise is either willfully blind or ignorant beyond any, what would you say, any morally acceptable degree. So, all right, so it was very,
Let me take a moment to respond to that, though, Jordan, because it's absolutely clear that everyone implicitly or explicitly has a religious belief. For some people, their religious belief is that there is no religious belief, but that then becomes its own religion. That is to say, some form of massive moral relativism becomes what, in fact, is what they worshipped. I stood in awe of you speaking on the stage at a couple of times about Jacob's Ladder and the book of Job. And you know, Jordan, what's fascinating about you, and I know this is your podcast, but priests, and I come from a Catholic background. I worked for Pope Francis. I co-chaired the Vatican Financial Reform Commission. I have quite a Catholic background. But priests cannot put people in pews, and yet you can fill the O2 arena with tens of thousands of young men to talk about the book of Job and talk about Jacob's Ladder and talk about the uphill struggle as being the moral struggle of our times. I just congratulate you and your colleagues, and I know you give a lot of credit to those around you as well, for just being able, Jordan, to enunciate this message in a way where it resonates to those who are genuinely lost, to those who are genuinely looking for a roadmap of how to have a better and more productive life. And I want to establish early on this call, I'm not a climate denier. I do believe that there are human influences that are very much putting our land, our air, and our water at risk. By the way, the planet has never had 8 billion inhabitants before. We're about to be 10 billion inhabitants. We're going to have to find ways to behave much more sustainably. But I was looking through my book of notes from the ARC conference, and one of the things that I wrote down is it's not the climate deniers, it's the trade-off deniers. And even in Laudato Si', in the papal encyclical written by Pope Francis on the climate crisis, he is very clear, Jordan, very clear, that there are trade-offs, that we need to have more prosperity. There are too many people that are left behind. The vast majority of human beings still use less electricity than one refrigerator uses in a year in the West. We need to find ways to improve access, improve availability, improve abundance and we've just finished this COP28 conference this morning, as you know, and they've come off and finally been able to say, let's phase out fossil fuels. But they're very quick, right? They're very quick to add that this must be done in a just way. Well, if it's done in a just way, the only way we're going to be able to get ourselves off of fossil fuels is by massively increasing nuclear, by massively increasing some other sources. And that is not plausible from now to 2050. We are simply going to be continuing to utilize this mix of fossil fuels that we're dependent on for reasons of justice. for reasons of human need, for reasons of human necessity. And as you pointed out and others at the conference, if you look around the globe, the wealthiest countries are the ones that actually have the cleanest energy mix. So we must prioritize continued economic growth. This is the mantra that I come to in my book repeatedly. Yes, we need more economic growth, but it needs to be more inclusive, and it does need to be more sustainable. And I am a member of the church that says, let's optimize between these various trade-offs, growth and cleanliness and sustainability. There are trade-offs, and we're going to have to navigate them. It's multivariable calculus. It's not as easy as the only thing that matters is net zero by 2050. It's not the only thing that matters. Many things matter.
Well, that only thing that matters narrative, I've been thinking that through in some detail. And so part of what we're facing on the pathological culture war front is oversimplification that occurs for two reasons. And the first reason is purely factual, is that there are human effects on the environment, some of which are deleterious. I was struck most particularly when investigating such effects on the effects of unrestricted coastal fishing on fish stocks, because I think that's something we've done particularly disastrously. There's a variety of problems like that, but the important thing is there's a variety, and that the solutions to those problems are actually, well, they're multidimensional and complex. And you can collapse all that into a single theory, which is that there's one fundamental environmental emergency that's climate related, and that can be attributed more or less solely to carbon dioxide. And so the temptation there is to take this overwhelming complexity on the factual side and reduce it to the kind of simple mantra that anyone can master really in about 15 minutes. And then you're done with that whole problem. It's like, well, no, the important thing is climate and the solution is carbon dioxide reduction. It's like, now the benefit to you is that you don't have to think anymore. But there's an additional benefit to the oversimplification, which I think is even more nefarious. And it's analogous to the oversimplification that's part and parcel of the victim-victimizer narrative. You know, if you view the world through a lens of power and you assume that every human relationship can be understood in terms of victim and victimizer, then all you have to do as a moral agent is claim your allyship with the victim, and you've solved your moral problem. And the same thing applies on the environmental front, is once you've established that carbon dioxide is the villain, then you can make yourself not only a moral agent, but something akin to the Redeemer himself by merely proclaiming your, what would you say, your moral commitment to the goal of carbon dioxide reduction. And so you eliminate having to think in the factual world, and you eliminate actually having to do all the work that accompanies genuine moral effort by swallowing the environmentalist narrative. And then there's even a darker part of it, as far as I'm concerned. And this is where things go from merely ignorant and blind to outright malevolent, which is that once you've identified the problem and the moral solution, you can also take aim at anyone who hypothetically stands in the way, and you can demonize them. And as a consequence of your demonization, you can let the worst elements in your character have full reign in relationship to how you treat those people. And you certainly see that with the victim-victimizer narrative that's being played out with Hamas at the moment. The Jews are the victimizers, the Palestinians are the victims, and so that means the Jews are properly subject to whatever punishment you feel inclined to mete out. It's the same with those who hypothetically are compromising the environment. And so it's such an ugly mess, because it's oversimplification factually, it's ridiculous reductionism on the moral side, and then it's the provision of a world that allows your desire for vengeful, resentment-driven, hypothetical justice to have full reign over those you deem to be enemies of you and the planet. A very, very toxic combination. And so that's the sort of thing, it's that combination, I believe, that actually presents the apocalyptic danger, and not whatever other problems, severe as they are, that might confront us on the environmental side.
Well, I have to give again credit to the ARC organizers because I think you had the most definitive speaker, Stephen Koonin, talk about the science. And when I'm in, I just spoke at a climate symposium at Harvard 2 weeks ago, you know, Jordan, and I always try to present facts calmly. There have been 5 mass extinction events on planet Earth in the last 500 million years. Every single one of them were caused by the planet cooling too quickly. That's how we lost the dinosaurs, as you know. You can actually give a litany of statistics, some of which I've gotten from Bjorn Lomborg over the years from the Copenhagen think tank. The polar bear population is 5 times what it was 50 years ago. Total sea rise in the last 100 years has only been 23 centimeters. 23 centimeters. Meanwhile, a lot of these atolls and these island nations, they've grown 123 centimeters. Many of them are actually in better position than they were. We are having less violent storms. But I think the Stephen Koonin argument, which is really an important one, is yes, human beings have an impact. Yes, carbon dioxide matters. But it matters at such a small level relative to many other factors that are actually impacting the climate, many of which we don't understand. So where I take that, and I try to not oversimplify the climate mess, but I always say that it's a complicated 2-part problem. One is a collective action problem. That is to say, the greenhouse gases that are emitted by 3 countries only, China, India, and Russia, right now are 2.5 times that emitted by the entire North American continent and European Union combined. So until India, China, and Russia are as serious about greenhouse gases as the rest of us are supposed to be, let's not kid ourselves. We still have a greenhouse gas problem. And then the other one is the Laudato Si Pope Francis. This is a multivariable calculus problem. What we have is people who are denying that there are trade-offs. Let's recognize that there are trade-offs, and let's have a calm, inclusive, fact-based conversation about what's the best thing to do. I brought a prop today. This is a plastic bottle, right? It has water in it. Well, so I was telling the crew before we started, this bottle today, Jordan, has 1/3 the amount of plastic that it had in it 3 years ago. That's not because of an ESG regulation. That's because it's cheaper to make it with less plastic, and you can do it with less plastic.